If you're in the film industry or TV industry, you definitely know about Blackmagic Design, but what about its founder and CEO, Grant Petty? Let's find out from the man himself. Grant joins us from his Melbourne headquarters, and Grant, 20 years the business has been going. Do you have to pinch yourself to realise how far you come where you are now?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a shock. I think, it's funny, in some ways you're just so busy focused on things that don't work, you don't actually really focus on how big it could be. I mean, we haven't had any investment to grow this business, and so it's not like we've taken other people's money and we had to prove how big it was going to be. We just focused on what needed to be fixed in the TV industry, and eventually it just grew into this. And so you kind of look at it and you think, sometimes you're surprised that it's this big, but at the same time you sort of think, well, it's not like we had any plans for it not to be this big, or we didn't really know what it would be. But the thing that I think you do pinch yourself about is the people you get to work with. I mean, we've got a team of people here that are just shockingly smart. And that's always like when you get into a product meeting and you're having a conversation about some complex problem, and just the way people think and being in that group of people is always a really, that's the thing that's most amazing.
Yeah, well, how amazing for you, Grant. When it comes to competing on the world stage, when you look at your humble beginnings, you now have that facility in Melbourne and elsewhere, but does it make you proud to be able to compete on a global stage, which you're doing right now?
I think so, but I was working in Singapore when I actually had these ideas. I used to work, started obviously in Melbourne in the post-production industry, and then moved to Singapore and worked there. And this is where I had the idea of doing these products, because a friend of mine bought a scanner and it came with software that could do paint. And I thought, why can't we make those software tools work? And I realised the publishing industry had an incredibly diverse set of software tools. So I thought, why can't we use these tools in television? And that was the original idea of where we started. But I think that I came back here because it was, at the time, it's not so much now, but it was cheaper to live here. But I think what's interesting is I always knew that the products we were building, we had to sell them on a global stage. And I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes. You can make crap products for a domestic market or awesome products for a global market. I mean, if you want to make an awesome product, it requires a huge amount of investment to build those products. You've really got to get essentially the economies of scales of a global market to be able to invest enough in the product itself to make it good. You just can't get enough business, and particularly in television in those days. I mean, when we started building our first products, we were doing things to empower people in the TV industry. So we were going after people that weren't empowered. I mean, by the very nature of you trying to empower creativity, you're trying to go after the people that aren't currently empowered. So I'm trying to sell products to people that aren't actually in the TV industry, or then they're working for someone else who's in it. So the problem is you're actually going after a market that doesn't even exist. So everyone thinks you're nuts. And so it is kind of funny that you've got to use a worldwide market even more so, because you've got such a tiny part of a market, because there's really no market yet. So you're looking for no market globally to be enough of a market to actually make it physically possible to do it, and then the market grows over time. So there was always a global perspective for two reasons. One, obviously, that I started thinking about the idea when I was living in Singapore, but secondly, I just couldn't invest to do a product like that without it being a global product. So, and I think that would be the thing that would be my advice to anyone. Just, the world is so interconnected, it's almost impossible to do anything local anymore.
So did you have to do this all on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to get bank loans at various points for different bits of equipment, because we actually have our own factory, so we had to buy our own SMT gear. There's huge investment in products, the components alone. You feel like constantly struggling with cash flow because you've got to buy enough components, because you're growing all the time, and we grow fairly strongly. So we've done it with no investment, no venture capital, no debt at all. I've got a little bit of overdraft at the moment, but that'll be gone soon. We've done it ourselves because that's given us creative freedom. The thing that has struck me about the TV industry, the problem I had with the TV industry, the reason the product company was set up is because it was all very equipment centric. I mean, an editing system cost, a design system cost over $1 million, editing cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we were trying to fix that. But to me, it meant the TV industry was very equipment focused. It was very, expensive, and it wasn't really a creative industry. It was more an equipment hire business. We hired that equipment by the hour. So I thought there was huge problems in the way the TV industry was, but then I've realised as I've grown, the business community also has the same problem. Business doesn't really handle creativity very well, so it's actually a very wide problem. And so it's been interesting as we've grown to sort of realise that the problem, you're almost kicking the problem down the road and realising that the problem's bigger than you expected. It wasn't just a TV industry thing.
So when you look back at those humble beginnings and how you grew up when it was a bit of a struggle back in the day, and you really speak to me because I grew up in a housing commission estate as well, and you think when you make yourself a success, do you look back and go, okay, there's the hard times, but is it easy to forget where you came from?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's a fantastic question. Do you forget where you came from? No and yes. Like, in other words, what's really interesting about that?
Right.
And you often see people talk about the fact that they come from a sort of poverty background, and it is fascinating. But the thing that saved me is that I was an electronics nerd. So I didn't really notice what's going on. The great thing about being nerdy is that you don't actually really know what's going on. That's why you're nerdy. I mean, if you were cool and hip and everything, you'd be like understanding what's going on around you. But the great thing about being a nerdy guy is that you could have nuclear mushroom clouds going off on the horizon. You'd see, oh, look, cool, a light and a battery. Like, you just don't notice the world that's going on around you, which can be a problem at times. But at the same time, you think, but it's housing commission. I mean, the taxpayers of the 70s paid for that house. So it's amazing when you think where you've come from. Someone else empowered me to go through a public school, public TAFE and a public housing, and also my mum was on a pension at times. That's the community actually supporting you. And so now when we do our products, we're supporting a creative community. So it's a very similar thing. Now's our time, to give, things for other people to bring them up. And that's the most exciting thing when you see like I was in a high school the other day and I was checking out their media area and there was a girl doing colour grading on DaVinci. She just downloaded, DaVinci's free, but it's the same tool that Hollywood use. So she was doing a nice grade actually, looked quite good. Now she's doing that and she's discovering that herself. Now she could work in Hollywood, in 6 months if she was doing good work, because that's all that matters now. So our DaVinci Resolve software, which does colour grading and editing and everything, you just download that for free. That's now us doing the same thing that other people did for us when I was a kid. So you don't forget where you come from, but you reinvent the same kind of thing and you try to keep it going, because I did amazing things with that, and I've seen other kids do amazing things with coming from those humble backgrounds. In fact, I also think you'd need it. I mean, you need the failure all around you to understand what success could, like what you need to do. Like, you can create your way out of poverty. So if you think about it, Australia's a property-based economy, which means that everything becomes very rigid. I think it explains the tall poppy syndrome. I think it explains sort of this bit of an aggression here. It also explains why Melbourne Airport's so crap, because all they care about is extracting every cent they can from the asset. And so what you find is that everything's very rigid. If you in a property-based economy, it's left and right in politics, fighting each other, all this sort of stuff. You have to fight to move your way up a hierarchy if in a property-based economy. That's what really, a good example of that is, what's the Australian dream? The Australian dream is buying your own house, property. What's the American dream? The American dream is lifting yourself out of poverty and changing the world. It's an IP-based dream. So it shows you the differences in the two different worlds, which is why I think that when people go to the US, they get a bit intoxicated by that thinking. There's a very almost extended adolescent style of childlike imagination that goes on in the US, where you can just invent everything. Here, it's a bit more serious. And so I think the thing that's really exciting is by having that support under you, like the education system, the TAFE system, things like that. Even the Apple II computer that was in the school that I discovered when I was in high school, and I started programming that, and immediately your mind leaves and your mind goes where it needs to go. Without creativity, there's no way of honestly pulling yourself out of poverty. I mean, you can do things and make things and create things, and suddenly you look back and go, wow, like I think we're within the 1,000th biggest companies in Australia, with no investment, no money put in. I mean, the shareholders put no money into the business to do that. So I think that demonstrates that you need the support of the community and the education and all that, but at the same time, it's up to us to do something exciting with it. And I think that's what creativity does, and that's why it's nice for us to be able to transfer that to our customers. I mean, how amazing to have customers that are also creative and doing creative things with your products.
Is that why you're in the business? I mean, is that why you're doing what you do? Because you're helping people make money out of your products. I mean, you're on record for saying that, aren't you? So That's what it's all about, and they can make money from your products.
That's true. I think that is the nice thing. I mean, look, I think that most customers, if you don't love your customers and be shocked by them, and even guys, I ride my bike past a concrete business, right? I mean, people make buildings out of that stuff. I mean, those trucks go off and they make buildings. I mean, that's pretty cool. I think you can be really excited by your customers. But from our point of view, our customers are creative. I mean, they're creating things with our products. So to us, that's a fantastic thing to be involved in. I mean, look at all the feature films. I think DaVinci's on at least 80% of the Hollywood feature films. That's pretty amazing to be part of that. So I think that it is exciting that our customers are creative, and they shock us all the time. I mean, some of the things they do, like we don't even know if a product's good enough half the time until you release it. They get it, and like we see people sending their work back to us, and we're just shocked at some of the incredible cinematography and editing and design and things people do. So it's really amazing to have this kind of customer base. It's a thrill.
Were you ever at all tempted, given the success of the company, to move the Victorian production facility overseas?
Well, we have factories in other locations. So what we've done, we've tended to basically just more to go global. We obviously the biggest restriction, one of the big advantages of being in Australia, even though the business environment around us that we've kind of had to hide from, one of the big advantages is it's very much a global kind of country now. We accept people from overseas and people come, we can get smart people, and that's a fantastic thing to be able to do. But it's still, we're really, our growth limits are really based on how many engineers we can get. And so we have other engineering facilities around the world and also other factories around the world. Australia's not good at making things. People, again, they get into conflict and fight each other. And people underestimate what manufacturing is. Manufacturing is extremely difficult. Like, it's really hard to do it properly. And so everyone has to collaborate and work together and constantly discover new ways of doing things. And we're pretty good at making things now. But it's just a lot of collaboration. And so we couldn't find that here. So we ended up having to put manufacturing facilities in overseas. So what we've tended to do is we've just tended to grow, and just into sort of a more of a global company. Like, I think we've got 350 people here, but we've got over 1,100 people globally. So it shows you how much of it now is actually overseas. But at the same time, the good thing is we have done here is we've recreated in this high Silicon Valley here. So we have our own translators here, our own marketing people here, photography, industrial design, hardware and software engineering, our own operating system, all this sort of stuff. That's all in one campus here through a whole bunch of buildings through the area. So we have almost in some ways recreated a mini Silicon Valley as well. So it's sort of organically grown as we've encountered challenges, and we just let it. It's not really, it wasn't planned to be like that, but it's sort of just evolved like that. So it's hard to answer that question. It's a good question, but it's a really complicated answer.
Well, let's ask the question again in a different sort of way, because China's been the centre of manufacturing for a long time, and a lot of people are trying to spread that out now so they don't make everything in China. So when it comes to the manufacturing process, and given your experience, could we make stuff here?
That's a really good question. I believe that the future of manufacturing is obviously more automation. If you get to a point of automation, then you potentially could build the products anywhere. I think that, we don't build our products in China, we build them in our own facilities, because we want to be able to sort of discover the things we don't know. And we push ourselves to, in fact, business culture, problems are seen as bad, right? And you don't want to sort of admit to problems because people hang you over them. But in our culture, what we're trying to do all the time is push forward and break things. And if we're doing that around a manufacturing facility, then we're discovering things that teach us. And so I think that you saw a bit of that in the 90s where the sort of Japanese manufacturing techniques were spreading around the world, and then suddenly the whole China thing came online, everyone just outsourced everything. So it's almost like you didn't have to be good at anything anymore because you just outsourced the whole lot. But our component lead times are over a year. We've got a lot of parts nowadays that are actually over a year lead time, and 6 months is probably some of the shorter lead times. So you've got a really complicated manufacturing process when you're managing that kind of thing. And so I think for us, having control over all that's really good. But I do think manufacturing can start to spread around. I think the way it'll probably do is you'll probably find customization and variation will probably become more local. I think that might be the case, but there are economies of scale advantages in obviously in the Chinese economy. You've got, if you were going to try and move manufacturing back to Australia, like one of the biggest issues you might have is just materials availability. Can you get billets of aluminium and various types of aluminium and other metals and use them, like make them available here? If I wanted to build a product here and it was totally automated, so there was no labour cost, I still couldn't do it because I couldn't buy the materials. I could buy the machine, we're all buying the same machine, but I can't get the material to go into the machine, so because I don't have the economy of scale here. So that's the other problem that you really get here. So I think that would be the difficulty you'd run into.
So how are you able to make things so cheap? Free new software, your cinema cameras at their price are just amazing cameras. So how are you able to do that and not rely on the cheaper manufacturing process in China to get the job done?
So I think one of the things, obviously we've got supply chains that reach up into China, and we've got offices that manage supply chains through the whole region. But we manufacture ourselves, and we see manufacturing as one of the core abilities that we have. So, if you outsource to China, well, you're really pretty much dealing with a very fixed sort of style of manufacturing process. And also with those long lead times of components and things, gives you a lot of rigidity in how you make things, whereas we've got a much more integrated supply chain than that. So basically we're just really innovative in manufacturing. It's one of the core things that we want to be really good at. I think one of the things that I recognized in the 90s when Japanese manufacturers were really good at it, it also gave them an underlying confidence to try things and be more experimental with their product lines. So I'm firmly in the belief that if you have a good manufacturing process and you're really, really good at it, like world leading or beyond world leading, you've also got the confidence from that lets you try things. And become more experimental and almost more bold in the product development side of things. So to us, the whole thing is integrated. The manufacturing, the industrial design, the electronics and software design, the whole thing, it's all one big integrated thing. We don't have the inefficiency of outsourcing. People think outsourcing is efficient. It's not, because you don't know about manufacturing when you outsource it, but then you have to manage it. So you've got a bunch of managers in-house that are now trying to manage something they don't really understand, and all they can really do is bully for cheaper prices, which is why I think China's starting to focus on IP development themselves, because they want to have, they're not just going to be bullied into being the cheap manufacturer for other countries. They want to become, original manufacturers of their own equipment, and and sort of integrate their own product design and manufacturing together. And I think that, to me, is the future of manufacturing, and that's what we do. And I think that just flowering the product to somebody actually ends up creating a whole lot of extra cost, and that's what manifests itself in high prices.
Can you give an idea of how locked into Hollywood you are? I mean, if you look at a bunch of films like you have on the wall here, there's obviously a big influence there, but how big is Blackmagic locked into Hollywood?
That's a good point. I think the Hollywood is what's really interesting. People don't understand what's really going on in Hollywood. The thing about Hollywood, there's a couple of interesting aspects to it. One is they don't care whether technology exists when they want to try and do something. So most films or work that people do, they're bound by the technologies available, like DaVinci Resolve. You can download it now. It's editing and visual effects and color correction, all that kind of stuff, and you can just do it. Now the difference with Hollywood is they might look at something and go, well, we need this to work a different way. So then we will collaborate with those guys and we'll change things. So what will happen is we'll change products for Hollywood stuff because it's required, but then that'll then come out in a release later on. So we've kind of got almost two, it's almost like a schizophrenic company with two kind of personalities, where you've got one personality which is almost like Formula One, where you're working with really the cutting edge films, putting cutting edge technology. I mean, DaVinci Resolve's got a lot of AI and this neural engine, DaVinci Resolve neural engine that's in it, doing all this kind of AI processing and things like that. Really quite intelligent stuff. But, and that's essentially been derived from a lot of those Hollywood films. But at the same time, you've got sort of the one you download, which is the very normal product, and it's got to be stable, and it's the thing that most people are working on. But you see bits of it. Like we've got a feature in the editing side of the product where you can go and do a close-up. Now it does a close-up based on someone's face, and it basically recognizes their face and then zooms in, and that's part of the AI part of it. So even though it's just a simple close-up, so where you can just create a close-up from a wider shot just by pushing a button, it will use some of the neural engine to do the processing and work out what are you zooming in on? And if the person's off to the left, it'll actually zoom in on them. So that's something that's essentially come out of Hollywood work from a few years ago, but now it sort of manifests itself in other parts of the product in a much simpler form, where it looks like a fairly simple function, but what it's doing underneath is actually quite robust and quite cutting edge. Even the stabilization, I was using the stabilization feature to stabilize a few shots, and it was absolutely rock solid, and I couldn't believe it was, because there was a bit of, it was basically instability caused by a fan in an air conditioning system that was vibrating a camera. And I couldn't believe how incredibly rock solid the shot was, but then you realize, but that was derived from work with the Hollywood guys. So the thing that always shocks me about DaVinci, you really are using the same product that was used on Avatar. Like this is the same product, you can download it for free and use it. And the tools in there are ridiculously good because they've been tested in that environment. So I've always had this philosophy that just because you don't have any money doesn't mean to say you want to use junk. And it doesn't mean to say you're stupid either. It means you just aren't successful yet. So the DaVinci Resolve is the purest form of who we are. The fact that you can have a Hollywood tool that used to be $800,000 to buy it, and you can actually download that on your own computer for free. So it's exciting. That's why you can see it's such a blend of collaboration and trickle down of those advanced features that eventually everyone can get. And of course, the biggest problem Hollywood has got is needing more people. They need more talented people. So if you've used DaVinci Resolve and you're getting good at something, knock on the Hollywood doors, because they need you. Like, people need you. So it's been exciting to be seeing both sides of that.
You mentioned you went to a school the other day and you were impressed, but do we need more engineers? If we do get more engineers, we still need people to create the art.
Yes. That's a really good question, and there's two answers to it. One of them obviously is yes. I think the thing that shocks me is that if you look at a high school and they do subjects like English, mathematics, history, science, why don't they have coding as one of those subjects? I think that if you've got a 6-cent microprocessor, you can put that in everything, right? And in fact, the way you design products these days is you just throw the microcontroller in there, finish the product, and just wire all the buttons to the microcontroller. Then later on, when you're collaborating with customers, you can work out which button does what. You don't even have to quite finish the product when you're developing it. So that means there's a huge need for software engineers. You need to have people that can almost learn the language of code. I mean, sure, you could learn French or German or some other language, but what about learning a code as a language? I really do think the schools are deficient if they're not actually doing that. We have to, not only that, the way, when you code, coding is actually not as hard as it looks, but the way you think, it helps you straighten your thoughts out. So I think that's one issue. But then there's the other side to that question, which is what I think I had the advantage of. The TAFE system in this country, my TAFE course cost $78, and that was back in the late 80s. They're $15,000 now, and it's kind of wrecked this. They've made the TAFEs professional, which has wrecked them where they were something else. What was really interesting is most of the guys I know that did that course, that electronics course that I did, didn't wind up in companies building products. And I think that's the difference. If you go to university, you're probably going to get a job in a company making a product. If you go to TAFE and do it, you might wind up somewhere else, but with that skill. And I think that if high schools had coding courses, for example, and also the TAFE courses, you teach people these skills in electronics, whatever, in TAFE, and then they leave and become, they work at a pizza shop. Say someone did coding in school or they wound up in a pizza shop. Now, if they're using the software that orders pizzas and organises all the supplies and things like that, and you don't like that software, you can tell that you don't like it because you understand that you could make it better than that. It gives you the power, and it actually empowers you to think that that's crap. When you learn the skills like coding, you can start to see that a lot of the stuff that you're interacting with, a lot of the software and tools like that aren't very good. And that means if you go off and like you might go off and write your own software, that then is the gestation of how innovation happens. So if you talk about creativity, it's teaching people that aren't professional software engineers how to code, or let them go off and then do these things because they see the real world. You've got to be in the world and see that things are wrong with it, and then you come up with the idea to make it better, and that is a tech company. That's an innovative new business. And that's how they come about. They don't come about because software engineers themselves just did software engineering. It's generally that you've got software engineering skill or hardware engineering skill and a different skill outside of that you bring together. So that's what is,
What I really like about your company is that you're making good equipment accessible to a lot of people. I do shooting with iPhone classes, and you just need a few techniques.
Yeah.
But if you know some techniques, you can do a great job. So the next step would be to get better broadcast gear like you're selling and unleashing creatives in the business. And the barrier to entry was to be really high. But now that's reduced, hasn't it? Is that important to you?
Very important. I think that it's fundamental to who we are. I think when I was in television, I was trying to build these products for my friends. What I was realising, I was trying to give them the ability to start their own businesses or to expand, and the businesses that were around, they could get bigger, they could do more work. I think that when the equipment, in some ways you could say that the equipment doesn't matter. I mean, what I'm really doing is I'm an equipment manufacturer who hopes to be able to make the gear so good and so affordable that it doesn't really matter. You don't even have to consider it. In the old days when I was in television, if you bought the wrong bit of gear, you could go out of business because you couldn't get customers to use it, and it was really dangerous. You had to be obsessed about the equipment. What I hope is people can use our gear and not really think too much about the gear. What they're thinking about is their own thing. They're thinking about their independent film or their sporting event or whatever it might be, and the particular skill that they've got in the creative angle, the area that they're in. I mean, you're doing an interview, right? So this is your thing, and that's the bit that really matters. In some ways we don't matter. We're just the stage that the performance happens on. Now, I like to go to old theatres and you see every scratch in the wood and think about what's happened over there. Some of these old theatres are over a century old, and you imagine the life that's lived on that stage and the moments that building's had. To me, that's the equipment. When you've got an old computer, an old camera, and you don't really want to throw it away, to sort of sit in the corner because you've got memories of what you've done on it. And I think that's our place. Our place is to be under people and supporting everyone, and it feels good to do that. It dovetails into the engineering side that I did when I was working in television, so it's a consistent culture for me. But I've always, when I was a kid and you go down to the beach and it would be full of people and it would be exciting. My parents wanted to go to a secluded beach and be the only one on the beach. I wanted to go to a beach that was jam-packed with people. There's something about humans and life and people just doing 1,000 creative things all at the same time, like a schoolyard or a beach on summer day. It's extremely exciting. It's everything that's good about being a human. And so that's what I feel like we're part of. We're able to participate in all these things globally, and we're just the stage that these creative people dance on, and that's our place, and it's fun to be part of it.
Love it. Can I ask you about your relationship with Apple? I think anyone who uses Blackmagic gear uses a lot of Apple gear. It seems like a match made in heaven. So when you look at their creative genius at the start, or their leader in Steve Jobs, and I see you as a bit of a Steve Jobs figure yourself in what you're doing with Blackmagic Design. I feel like there's a great synergy between the two companies. What can you tell us about that relationship with Apple?
Well, I started building products right at the point where Apple was at their lowest in the late 90s, and everyone said I was crazy, but I knew that creative customers, my friends, used Macs as a platform. The thing that I think creative customers love about the Mac platform is it's just that, I think, like, if you're going to say the difference between developing a product on a Mac and, say, developing on a PC, if you develop a product on Windows, it tends to be every feature you can find that you think you need, you throw it in there and you ask the question, you're putting up dialog boxes and all kinds of stuff all the time in a million settings, because you're not quite sure what the customer needs, but you're just assembling every feature that you think they could need and you're putting in there. So it's like a toolbox of capability. But on the Mac platform, it's a little bit different. You tend to really have to deeply think through what the customer's going to be doing, because you then focus the product up a bit more to do that, and you try not to disturb them with dialog boxes and too many settings and things like that. You try to make the software a little bit more intelligent, because you know that they don't want to know about the complexity. They want just a simple environment that they can do their work on. Their work's what really matters, and so there is cultural differences between the platforms, and we're probably culturally aligned much more to the Mac platform. We work closely with Apple on a bunch of products, and so I think our cultures are somewhat aligned. But I learned to program on an Apple II computer back in the 80s, and I don't know how to do tech businesses right apart from this way. So I think what's probably happened over time is, as I've programmed that Apple II and migrated to other computers, I've just migrated and learnt the culture that sort of the Mac platform has. So generally, we make DaVinci, for example, it's on Windows. All our products have Windows utilities and Mac utilities. But at the same time, I think we're probably the culture. Apple's, they were one of the pioneers of computers, or in some ways the pioneer. They created their own development culture, and we kind of went along and learnt that culture. And so, is it a Californian culture, or is it unique to Apple? It's probably both. And so I just think we're just culturally. My line that I've used in people is we're formation flying with them in a cloud, with no idea what they're doing, and they've got very little idea sometimes of what we're doing. And then when we come out of the cloud, we want to be side by side. And so, we adopt technologies, we work closely with them on technologies and things like that, and it's fun. I think we both get a lot out of it. But the thing that shocks me about Apple is they're this massive company, but even when we were 5 people, we still could work with them on projects. I mean, what other company can be that big and work with companies that are so small at that point? And now we're big and doing major product lines, but it is amazing that they can do that. And so that's always shocked me how they're able to work with incredibly small companies. But I think that's because if those people got a good idea, that's what really matters with a company like Apple. They're focused on whatever's exciting and great. And so that's kind of, I think, a sort of a rough, complicated answer to that question, but it's sort of how we kind of work together, I think.
What about consumers? You offer products that are probably considered prosumer, but not really consumer down that line. I don't think they're really in that consumer market. So is there ever a chance that Blackmagic Design could go down the consumer line of products in the future?
Well, I think that what you probably see is that if you look at our Pocket Camera 4K, that's a digital film camera that's only, I'm not sure what the Australian price is, but it's $1,300 US. That is actually cheaper than DSLRs, but it's a digital film camera that's doing incredible filming images, and it got all the features and stuff that like 3D lookup tables and all these settings for focus and all these other things, and it shoots RAW and all these kinds of stuff. So I mean, that's a pretty professional product. So it's cheaper than a consumer product in that category. But I think that's what you'll see us doing. I mean, we have a range of products that, like the free DaVinci and the cut page, the new faster editing software is also easy to use. So that's kind of, you could say that's consumer. I mean, other companies actually that so-called have consumer products charge cloud fees and things like that. We don't do that. We make it free because we know that if someone gets really good at it, they'll move up to some, like maybe the paid version or hardware products that go around that. I mean, but most people don't need the paid version. They don't need AI and collaboration and all that stuff, not unless there's 10 people in their company. So most people can just use the free version. So that to us is actually how we do consumer. Like the new little A10 mini switcher we've got, it switches 4 cameras and it's got a webcam output. So you can plug it into Skype and do a presentation through Skype and like a business presentation, or
love it.
You could live stream using some software to live stream to YouTube. That's only $300, US that is. But those sorts of things, it's not a junky product. It's actually a full-featured switcher like that our top-end switchers do. I think that's how you see us doing consumer products. We can hit close to the price point, sometimes better the price point, sometimes a little more, but we'll have all these professional features in there because I don't think my feeling is that you can be a consumer and just play with a toy, but if you're buying products from us, you probably want it to be consumer priced. That's fine, but what you actually want is a whole lot of hidden features in there. You want pro features in there, so you get a chance to learn them. And if a student like that I saw the other day was using DaVinci. She's using the same software that they're currently grading all the feature films on. So she's not in any way doing anything there's no glass ceiling above her, because she's not learning the wrong workflow. She's learning the right workflow. And so she'll find that as she moves up, there's nothing she has to change. It's like on those countries that use the imperial number system. I think if they become scientists, you've got to learn a new number system. That's kind of hard. It'd be nicer if they just used metric,
Yes.
And I think that it's almost like that with our products. If we can put all these professional features in there, I mean, our pocket camera is a shrunk down version of our big camera, right? It's got the same features in the software. So I think that's how we do consumer. We do it in a way where it's, we can hit the price points and we won't be the cheapest consumer product, but we'll be definitely in the range. But what you get is a whole lot of professional features. So you're learning the right techniques. And as you move up, you don't have to learn anything new. So you can just focus on your creativity instead. And you just move up in product lines if you find you've got some limitation that could be because you're getting big and you're actually making money. Like I joke and say that our goal is to trick our customers into being financially successful. Because if we can give them a consumer type product and they use it and realize what they can do with it, they don't even realize what they're learning. And then suddenly one day they're making money and they're going, hey, it's working. And they come back and buy something else, hopefully, and that's where we can, keep making more business and we can keep a relationship going with them.
So I guess you're not a fan of subscription services, things like Adobe and Microsoft are doing. What about that? I guess you're not really a fan of it.
Well, look, I think there's a role for it. I definitely think there's a role for when you've got really low volume, extremely complex software. Like we've got software that does circuit boards, we've got literally software that simulates a circuit board trace at high frequencies and the data rates and stuff these days. I mean, that's not a wide software, and so it doesn't have a big market. So those guys have to, sometimes that's software's like hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy it. You could definitely see a subscription model working on that, because you just basically rent it per month. It's still going to be a lot of money. It's going to be thousands, but you get a chance to get access to that high technology and do some jobs on it and things like that. So I think there is a role for it. For us, I think the problem particularly with creative people, is that I feel the cloud software, there's two problems with it. One problem is that if your customers are loyal and they use your software a lot, you're actually trapping them. You're not rewarding them for that. You're actually trapping them. So their own loyalty is actually being used against them, because all their work is jammed in that cloud software. I mean, everyone knows you might have an old 10 or 20-year-old computer that you can pull off an old version of software with an old job on it and pick up some of your old legacy work. I mean, people can often work for 10 or 20 years or more on various kinds of work. It could even just be documents. If you can't open those on an old computer with the old software, you've lost that. Well, what happens to cloud software once, some of the, at what point do you lose all your old work? So there's that issue. But secondly, I think there's more of a business issue. What they've actually done is turn software into property. So it's not an IP business anymore. They've turned it into a sort of a property-based business. Because if you don't have to do exciting new features to get the upgrade anymore, because the customers are kind of just locked in. You just got to keep them interested enough that they keep paying the cloud subscription. In the old days, you'd have to do something extraordinary that would force them to want to go along and get the upgrade because it's so awesome, that new software is great. So I definitely want to do that. So you kind of, you're making the software or your product have amazing new features that people then want to go out and buy it. Now it's like you just got to keep them dribbling along. So I think it's a business culture that I think is fine for the moment, but it could have long-term problems. For us, our model is different. What we want is essentially give the software away and give people a chance to get going for nothing, no risk, nothing, and they can, and also not lock people into it. So let them get in and out, export projects out and import them in, because then if you don't lock people in, they feel like if they can know they can escape, they don't have to feel like they have to. They'll tend to probably stay in it because they don't have to worry about leaving if they need to. And that also means our own engineering teams will do better quality work, and they'll try and do things that actually can attract new customers. So it's a more healthy way of growing new customers instead of trying to steal them from someone else. But I think then if you start to become financially successful, then we've got other products for you. We've got hardware control panels, editor keyboards, all kinds of capture cards, all sorts of things that you can buy extra that can enhance your system. And that's then when we make money. So we hope you download the software for free, you hopefully become successful, you start to make a bit of money, and then you come back to us and buy some extra things, and that's where we get paid. So I think that's a better model, because it's a model that enhances and empowers creativity, which is the core of who we are. And so I think that model is much better. Making it free and then having some additional things you can buy on top of that later when you're successful is more aligned to who we are as a company. It's the best. DaVinci Resolve being free, but being a Hollywood product, is the best expression of who we are culturally. So that's why it's so important to us. And I think the cloud doesn't really live up to that.
Grant Petty, thank you very much. Fantastic stuff. There he is, the founder and CEO of Blackmagic Design, a global company making massive impacts on the cinema industry and of course the TV broadcast industry. Some great lessons there too, coming from a battler background up to the dizzy heights of where he is at the moment now as CEO of one of the top companies in the world in technology. So it's great to be back on our feed with Conversation Bytes. And as I said, I held off some time for this interview with Grant because I wanted to hit the ground running once we started to emerge from the pandemic, and we certainly have now. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. The next one will be with you in 2 weeks' time when we talk to another leader in technology in Australia, maybe overseas. Make sure you tune in to find out.